Hello there, and welcome to another Stompy 51 miniature adventure. This week is about cowboys, rummaging through a lot of cowboys. Because I had a great game of Dead Man's Hand the other night, even if I basically got massacred. And I've spent the week listening to the story of Billy the Kid. Spoiler, it doesn't end well for Billy. But because I know that people love seeing what other collectors have in their stash, I thought I would share with you what's in my Old West box. It's not a load of professional salon tools, I'll tell you that. It's a whole load of metal I've collected over the years, 28mm cowboys from a range of manufacturers. But as we're going to be looking at these through the prism of a game I played the other night, Dead Man's Hand, I thought I would give you a super quick, super high level summary of the mechanics around this, because that's the prism through which we'll be looking at the miniatures. So beautiful front cover art there by Peter Dennis. A lovely summary in the front. Basically, the engine behind the game is based on a normal deck of cards, but each card on it has a kind of a boost to your own character, or a take that kind of mechanic thing, or something which makes life harder for your opponent in each case. And the cards have two roles. One is whatever number or ace, king, queen, jack there is on the top of them, you work from the top to the bottom. Once you've dealt each character who's alive in a turn a card, and the ones with the higher number go first, the ones with the low number go last. And like in Malifaux, there's no dice rolling which kind of affects initiative. It's not luck based. You've got one deck, and if you've blown all your good cards in the first turn, well, it's going to go downhill for you as the game goes on. But at the same time, because otherwise it would just be, you work down, people do things, and you can't control it. You have a few cards in your hand, dependent on the scenario, and you can play those to make your characters do better or make life harder for your opponent. And there's a kind of back at you kind of mechanic as well, which is very clever. So there's good balance in each of these mechanics. I did enjoy the game. When it's your character's action, they get 3 actions. They can move, fight, aim, shoot, reload, recover, or they can do 3 of those things. They can move, they can move, fight, they can move, shoot. But the thing is, it depends on the weapon that they're holding. The weapons all have ranges, as you would expect. Some can shoot more than once, some are limited to shooting once, some are fantastic close up, some can shoot really quite far and allow you to aim multiple times to take kind of sniper shots. And some of these weapons, which I didn't really use, give you a bit of a buff in hand to hand. There are not a huge number of modifiers in shooting. Fundamentally, if you shoot lots of times, the later shots are less likely to hit. It's a D20, which I found really quite swingy. Generally 10 plus, is either going to cause 1 damage or scope for multiple damages, or just be a headshot and take you out, which is fantastic. And they've mashed together being shot so you're dead or shot so you're injured, with you thinking, maybe I need to get out of here, this isn't any fun, and you just take under fire markers. And each character has, depending on how tough and grizzled they are, there's a number of under fire hits that they'll take, under fire markers that they'll take, I think between like 2 and 5, something like that. And when they hit their cap, they're off, unless you manage to roll like a 19 or a 20 modified, and they just, I suppose that's the headshot or gut shot. And I found that quite fun, and that reminded me a little bit maybe of the pinning system in Bolt Action. So I felt that there were a number of mechanics which I think if you use a lot of the games these days, but they're all good mechanics and good fun. But this, I did feel like I was playing a Wild West game, because really of these beautiful cards and the Wild West themed principles on them. There are, I think, like 20, 30 factions or something. There's one book called The Good coming out, I think, is it June, July? I can't remember. And then much later in the year, was it October, November, The Bad and the Ugly, with loads more factions. But for now, there are only 4 factions. You got your lawman with a sheriff with a pistol, marshal with a pistol, loads of deputies, or gump upstanding citizens, and they tell you what weapons they can come with. People generally come with a pistol. They can come with a rifle, repeater, or a shotgun. I think most factions, except the Cowboys, say you have to take at least half your crew with a pistol. And that's really the problem that I have as I go through my collection, and that for whatever reason, in other gaming systems, like I think Dracula's America, which I played, you wanted to be arming everyone, if you could, with a rifle, because they were so much better, as you can imagine. There's Outlaws, which are pistols or repeaters. Cowboys, who don't have that limitation, I believe, they can all have rifles or repeaters. So I'm not sure what the downside for them is. And I suppose each faction has a number of special faction characteristics which make them what they are and make them special. The Desperados, who I think just kill whoever they want to kill, as you can imagine. Killer, hijackers, bandits, and greenhorns. So, enough about the rules. Certainly fun enough to play another game, which I will do. But let's go into what I've got. So there is another video I've done setting out all of the painted Cowboys I have. If I was Uncle Tom, what's his name, Uncle Adam, I would go ka-chow, whatever he says, and work out how to point to a link to the other video, but I'm not that. You don't watch this channel for high production quality, so you'll have to go find that and scroll down. I think it's with Dracula's America. But these are some miniatures which I had Zenithal primed a while back, and we'll get into these before we get into what's in the box. So I think this guy is from Brigade Games, and he came with a set of I think 3 or 4 others who are clearly characters from Deadwood. This is the elderly doctor from Deadwood, and I don't know why, but something made me think this was a Paul Hicks figure. But open to thoughts. On a postcard, was he Swingen? I mean, there's something quite funny about Dead Zone. I mean, it was quite grim and dark, frankly, but all these Wild West characters were escaping life on the Eastern Seaboard or Europe, and seemed to speak in some kind of weird Shakespearean monologue, often into the camera, which was quite fun. But these guys aren't armed, so I guess they would be civilians, because there's no scope, I think, in these rules for overarching mob boss. This guy was from Black Scorpion Designs, and I think I bought these as Malifaux proxies and did certain things with the heads. I mean, they are a lot bigger. I think this is from the period when Black Scorpion was doing metal casting, which obviously was at a cost, and they now do, I think, everything in resin. I have had some of their resin stuff, although that was in itself about 10 years ago, and I just felt that the metals were a bit better, but I haven't bought anything from them recently, and everyone is quite personal, really, on their preference for metal versus other materials. So he's quite a big fella, but then again, he's not totally out of keeping. He could just be some very tall guy. So that's him versus the Brigade Games Paul Hicks stuff. These are some, they look very Mark Copplestone Mexicans from Wargames Foundry. I mean, they are little ladies, and so this huge guy being much bigger than them isn't necessarily fatal to either of them. There is something sad looking at the heavy labour that they seem to be undergoing, but I suppose that's a reflection of the Old West of the time. Makes it sound like some kind of Arthur Koestler novel. Another lady selling aranchas, or whatever they're called. I really should paint these. It wouldn't be too hard. And he's an Artizan Designs. Crazy Scottish character. And I'm sure that one of the Desperados does have 2 pistols. And he's not very big, but then again, he does look quite scary. This guy's a Malifaux character, was it Hamelin? And he sort of would go through towns, calling out the rats and grabbing people's brains and doing crazy rat-like things with them. And I kept him because in Dracula's America, there was loads of scope for kind of Old West psychic snake oil type powers being used, and sun dancing and all that, moon dancing. I think some of the characters, again, probably Paul Hicks by Brigade Games, were these entrepreneurial ladies selling what they had available at the time. But again, I haven't got around to painting them because no game has really brought out a particular use for civilians. I'll have to see if Dead Man's Hand does. I did see some fleeting references to them, but in Dracula's America, all they ended up being was just scope for being taken as hostage, really, and like protective markers for your main characters, and people playing would either say, I'm not going to do that, or the more I want to win kind of guys would just do whatever they wanted with all the hostages, which was very naughty and slightly odd. And I suppose a game which had a proper mechanic for them, maybe it's a Gangs of Rome, which I haven't played, but I've heard, you can kind of run and hide amongst the crowds of Rome and all of that, but I suppose you wouldn't have mass crowds walking around a Wild West town. Maybe it is, as I say, written somewhere into the Dead Man's Hand rules. I'll have to take a look. And that's a Bob Murch figure. So he's got a number of Americanos, whatever, Mercenarios Americanos from the Zapata Rebellion. I don't know much about it. I suppose Mexico had a number of civil wars, and this must be the one just before World War One. I mean, all I know about that war is really watching the Three Amigos in the 80s. And so there's a bunch of Americans with probably weaponry that is beyond being in the Old West, but to my mind, at this scale, all looks the same. I love Bob Murch, but some of his stuff, the characters are just throwing their bodies around in ways that I can't imagine are all that realistic. I mean, on one hand, this guy looks very animated, but on another, I mean, what is he doing? I suppose he's kind of half diving for cover. And that's him scaled against a Wargames Foundry, Old West, more recent sculpt. And by more recent, I mean, obviously, there were the Mark Coppleston sculpts. I remember first seeing in like a 1997 Salute, and they're quite small. They're more 25mm, and he's clearly more 28, 30mm. And the Bob Murch figure is beautifully in keeping with him. This guy over here is, I think, a Malifaux orphan or something. And although he's supposed to be a kid, he's a pretty huge kid. And this guy on the left is part of the Wargames Foundry Mexican range, which I think are based on another war in Mexico, about which I know very little. Is it the Maximilian Adventure, when they decided to try and put some kind of Austrian duke on the throne? Was it Napoleon III, one of his many great ideas? Didn't end well for the duke, who I think got strung up, albeit there's a book I want to read from the library, a fairly recent book about the Maximilian Adventure. And as I understand it, this duke was given all manner of opportunities to get out, but foolishly decided not to. Another Mexican fellow from the Wargames Foundry range, another Bob Murch cowboy, albeit I'm not sure what the scope is in Dead Man's Hand for having a guy with two weapons, two pistols. But I suppose you just say he had one pistol until such time as it was needed. I mean, I always get a bit confused between these two characters because they look like they're supposed to be the same character. Is it from The Good, the Bad and the Ugly? The small Mexican fella. I suppose they look different enough, and they'll be different enough once painted. So he's Artizan design, and that's Wargames Foundry. Perfectly in keeping, I would say. There's one of those old Cobblestone Foundry miniatures I mentioned. I mean, he is tiny, but then again, he could just be some raucous teenager, a little Billy the Kid, albeit I think Billy the Kid was called Billy the Kid because he had cute little cheeks. I think he was actually quite a tall fellow, but I'm open to correction. Another Mexican lady with another Cobblestone Mexican peon, albeit he looks like the chief peon in the village, and you don't want to be hit by his panga, whatever they call those in the West. Then there's this, which I don't think is Old West at all. I bought for my pirate games a couple of dueling dudes from, I suppose, what must be late 17th century, and they were dueling, and then she came with them. And I suppose, I can't think of a real use for this. Maybe I'll just sell it. I mean, given how little she's wearing, she could be certainly for the Old West on this divan imported from the East Coast. But again, I can't think of any possible purpose. I mean, she's not going to walk around outside through the Old West town. What have we got here? All right, we'll come to it in a bit. I reckon he's Malifaux. Is it the 10 Thunder Brothers? Like a kind of Chinese Tong-based gangster faction. And, I mean, he's very big. Not that big, but he's pretty big. Yep, he's pretty big. And he'll be quite cool if I decide to go forward with some kind of Tong faction, which I'm pretty sure that Great Escape Games caters for. Anyway, so there we were talking about a Chinese faction, and I think he's from the Great Escape Games range, and lots of character, and he does look quite like he's from Deadwood, but the thing is, they're not all very defined in my humble opinion compared to some other miniatures, and that's, I can't remember it. North Star, I think. Dead Man's Hand. And he definitely looks like that guy from Deadwood who keeps feeding everyone to his pigs. And in Malifaux, you had some kind of Japanese spirits, which I thought meant this miniature could be used for something in Dracula's America. Then you've got the Copperston 1920s Chinese mercenaries, or I don't know what they're called, Chinese peasants, part of one of the Back Beyond range, I think. Over there, that's some Boxer Rebellion Perry miniature, but you know, they look sufficiently in keeping with each other to be used together. But the fundamental flaw here is that there's loads of rifles, few weapons, but not, you know, hand-to-hand weapons, but not a lot of pistols, which is not good news. I mean, that guy's got a shotgun, a very bendy shotgun. He's Great Escape Games. That's some kind of evil sorcerer. Very 1980s Chinatown horror. Wouldn't want to get hacked into that, which I think also is North Star Miniatures. And then another swaying spirit, which again, I suppose you could get away just painting that Games Workshop Hetherax green or whatever it was called, the one where you just ladle it on and it looks kind of ethereal or just grey or white. That's Empire of the Dead by West Wind. There's a tad bit thinner perhaps, but you know, still broadly in keeping. That's El Capitan or whatever by Wargames Foundry, along with a couple more of his musket-bearing minions. A whole load more Mexicans, a Mexican from Great Escape Games, more peons from Wargames Foundry, and how do they all fit in with a big chunky Bob Merch Zapatista? Pretty well, I would say. Even more Mexicans. This guy's so big, in fact, I'm not sure he's in keeping at all, or he's just a big guy you don't want to mess with as part of La Revolucion. That guy's a bit smaller, but still broadly in keeping. He looks like he's in some kind of Beatles theme band in Mexico in the 70s, but nothing wrong with that. Bob Merch, more Bob Merch, and some kind of desperado looking fellow from Great Escape Games. So they do all fit in beautifully. He's one of the characters also from Deadwood by Paul Hicks, I reckon. Sleeping Peon. Not sure I need him. He's obviously from Back or Beyond. Then we come to a whole load of what they call Crowfoot or Blackfoot in their Wargames Foundry. And they've got bows, largely bows, and will have to be given spears. And for that, I think I would use the Fireforge Game Plastic Spears. He's some kind of medicine man. And I do believe that Great Escape Games does have some kind of Plains Indians. I'm not sure if the Crowfoot were Plains Indians, but hey, this is some kind of big character from North Star Productions for Dracula's America, I think it was. Oh no, I'm talking absolute rubbish. This is Bob Murch, and it's for his 17th century Contact game where, was it Prince Philip's War? Where all of the British in Virginia suddenly come across the Indians of the time who don't yet have firearms, and they all get on, don't get on, massacre each other, all that usual heinous historical stuff from the Elizabethan period. And these are even more Crowfoot, who all seem to have a mounted counterpart. I have to work out how to bend that rifle in a way which means it doesn't look like an undulating spatula or something from a kitchen. And there's even more in here. What's more Blackfoot. Oh, that just bounced out. That shield isn't something I just lose now. They must be mountainous because they seem to be dressed very, very warmly. Showing my total lack of knowledge of the entire American continent. I've never been there though, so how would I know? To the Appalachian Mountains. More horseborn Blackfoot. Back in they go. Some horses. And more Blackfoot. And then these I always thought were a bit weird. And I don't know why I bought them, but I bought them about 15 years ago. And I think they were from the States. So I paid a small fortune for their postage. Not sure why, I thought it was a good idea. They looked like they were sculpted by the same guy. Well, these ones at least. The firemen, sculpted by the same guy who does Artizan designs. Why I needed a whole bunch of firemen, I don't know. And I think I probably will part with those and swap them for something a bit more in keeping with a normal Old West game. Although the way I tend to roll after parting with something like that, you then find some rule system where they are exactly what you would have needed. And then I painted a good number of Apaches, but not all of them. And these are some mounted Apaches. And I painted the foot equivalents. And they must be later Apaches because they seem to be armed with carbines. Albeit that might be a musket. Either way, I wouldn't want to run up into them on the open plains. And I don't think the Mexicans wanted to either. And then what's this? This is a massive bump of something. Bit of a gent, and he's quite tiny, as is that fellow. I think these were different sculpts of Jack the Ripper or something odd. Not sure what he's from. Crooked Dice, something. He's huge. Not really in keeping. He and his arm, which by a miracle I haven't lost, or some kind of witch hunter general character from possibly Dracula's America. The Artizan designs had a random set of weird European characters walking around the Old West. One was that Scottish fellow I showed at the beginning, and this guy seems to be, the Kaiser or Bismarck with his cuirassier armor walking around. Another Paul Hicks Lady of the Night there. And then a Preacher Lady, possibly by Mark Copleston in his Africa range. And the guy on the left, I think, is the sorry little fella walking around the Deadwood set, which this is obviously inspired by. Is he Steve Saleh in his Lucid Eye designs? A very tall fellow. But I think the idea is that he's some kind of futuristic guy dropped into the Wild West. And so even though he's supposed to look Wild Westy, he's basically a bit more armoured and steampunk than usual. And this fellow on the left, who I really don't like, I don't think kind of came out very well from the casting process. I think he's a Pinkerton. I just didn't like the look of him, so I think I may part with him. And then, that is not all, no, that is not all what's in this bunch. Another Apache, some kind of Sherlock Holmes character by West Wind. A Copleston Lady of the Night. How does she fit in with the other ladies of the night? That's something you often come across in game systems. About the same scale. Oops, that's not a Lady of the Night. That's just the Rosarita. There's a Lady of the Night. Yeah, so bigger. She might be Copleston, or the guy from Artizan Miniatures, as part of Dracula's America. Legends of the Dead there. Or it's Wee Willie Winky running through the town, upstairs and downstairs, with his little oil candle. Some more Foundry Mexicanos. More Foundry Mexicanos. Some kind of sheriff who looks a lot better painted than I think the sculpt suggests. And he was a bit more expensive from Great Escape Games, but he's all right. But unfortunately, again, very heavily armored for most games. And then a Great Escape Games Mexicano. Another Mexicano. Some kind of huge-handed Native American witch. Some kind of cowboy by the guy who did Artizan Miniature stuff. She's got wings in there somewhere. That was Dracula's America. Mexicano. Great Escape Games Mexicano. I was very impressed by his casting quality, this one. He's all right. I suppose you could just file that mold line down. Another Mexicano. Another Mexicano. Peon Mexicano. And we're done. At which point I think I'll call it. So please do like, comment and subscribe to see more. I'm planning to paint a good number of these civilians, I hope, this weekend. I've realised that it is worth painting a lot of miniatures at once, even if it takes 2 or 3 weekends of an hour here or there to do it, because you end up painting a lot more, I think a lot more efficiently. So let's see how that goes. See you soon.